I built my off-grid cabin with my own two hands. 3 years of hard work with solar panels, a rainwater system, 14 acres of land in the Pennsylvania woods, no outside rules, complete self-sufficiency. Then she drives up in her white Cadillac, steps out, looks at me and sneers. This doesn't belong here, and neither do you. I walked back inside. 20 minutes later, I found a $2,400 fine taped to my front door. Constance, the brand new HOA president sitting high on her little throne, had made her move. She went after my solar panels, my water system, and my right to exist on land I owned outright. I'm a retired electrician, no law degree, no money for lawyers. What I had was time, a library card, and one fatal flaw she left buried in her own HOA bylaws. She had no idea I'd find it, and what I did with it in just 30 days made her wish she'd never pulled into my driveway. Ever had someone with a little power make your life hell? Drop your state below and tell me how far they pushed you. Let me back up a bit because context matters. The backstory is half the reason this whole thing hit different. My name's Garrett Winslow, and I'm not some trust fund homesteader who bought a piece of land and called it rustic living. I'm a 54-year-old former electrician from western Pennsylvania who spent 28 years running wire in commercial buildings, raising 2 kids mostly on my own after my wife Denise passed away from ovarian cancer in 2017. When the kids were grown and gone, my daughter Paige off to nursing school in Columbus, and my son Reed working in the pipeline in North Dakota. I looked around at my rented apartment in Harrisburg and thought, this isn't living. This is just waiting to die indoors. I'd always wanted land, real land, not some quarter acre with HOA-approved mulch colors, but actual acreage where I could build something from nothing. In 2021, I found it 14 acres in the Pinehurst Ridge area of rural central Pennsylvania, a patch of mixed hardwood and meadow about 4 miles outside a small town called Dunor Falls. The price was right because the land was raw. No utilities, no cleared road, nothing. And that was the appeal. I spent the next 2 years doing it right. I filed permits through the county building permit, septic waiver, electrical exemption for off-grid systems. I put up a modest 960 square foot timber frame cabin, 2 stories with a wraparound porch. I installed a 6 kilowatt solar array with battery backup, a 3,000 gallon rainwater system with UV filtration, and a wood gasification boiler that could heat the place on just 2 cords of wood per winter. I also kept a small diesel generator as a backup to the backup, smelling like every honest job I'd ever worked. The cabin wasn't flashy, but it was mine. Raw cedar siding, metal roof, big south-facing windows for passive solar. It sat on a gentle slope overlooking a seasonal creek. When the morning light came through those windows in October, hitting the knotty pine interior walls, it looked like something out of a dream I'd been having for 30 years. Here's the thing no one warned me about. My 14 acres happened to sit within the legal boundaries of the Pinehurst Ridge, HOA. I didn't know this when I bought the land. The listing didn't mention it. The real estate agent, a cheerful young man named Derek who smelled like car air freshener and barely looked at the title documents, didn't flag it. That detail became important later, so I built my cabin, got my county permits, moved in, and spent the better part of a year living peacefully. Then Pinehurst Ridge HOA got a new board president. Her name was Constance Aberfoyle. Constance was 61, recently retired from a career in municipal contract management. She had moved into Pinehurst Ridge's primary residential cluster, a neighborhood of 74 cookie-cutter homes about 2 miles from my parcel, roughly 8 months before the fine showed up at my door. She had been elected HOA board president at a poorly attended annual meeting where she ran unopposed and won with 11 votes. Yes, 11 votes. I would later learn that the previous president had resigned after Constance joined the board and made his life miserable for 6 weeks straight. Constance drove a white Cadillac SUV with a custom plate that read PRSDRGE. She had opinions about fence heights, lawn equipment, decibel levels, and apparently my entire existence. The first unfair act wasn't the fine. Actually, 2 weeks before the orange envelope arrived, Constance sent a certified letter informing me that I needed to submit an architectural review application for structures I'd already built, permitted, and been living in for 11 months. The application fee, $350. The review timeline, up to 90 days. The implied message, we know you're here and we don't like it. I filed that first letter in a drawer and went back to splitting firewood. The thwack of the maul, the smell of fresh split oak. I figured I'd deal with it eventually. I should have dealt with it that day. Then the $2,400 fine letter arrived on a Thursday morning in early March. And by that afternoon, I was sitting at my kitchen table with a yellow legal pad, a cup of black coffee, and the growing realization that I had underestimated Constance Aberfoyle significantly. The fine was itemized. That's what got me. It wasn't a vague penalty. It was a surgical document. $800 for an unapproved permanent structure, my cabin. $600 for non-permitted energy generation equipment, my solar array. $500 for unauthorized water collection system, my cistern. $300 for aesthetic non-compliance, exterior materials, my cedar siding apparently. $200 for failing to submit required documentation within the architectural review window, the documentation they'd asked for 2 weeks ago that I hadn't sent yet. I called the HOA management company Elevate Community Solutions based out of Camp Hill. The woman who answered put me on hold for 4 minutes before connecting me to Dwight Finney, a property manager who spoke with the careful, rehearsed tone of someone who had delivered bad news to angry homeowners so many times he'd stopped feeling anything about it. Mr. Winslow, the fines are valid under the Pinterest Ridge CC&Rs as adopted in 2019, Dwight said. I replied I wasn't notified of those CC&Rs. He answered, the annexation was recorded with the county. Recorded documents are considered constructive notice. Constructive notice meaning they put it in a filing cabinet somewhere, so legally I should have known. Takeaway. When you buy land, always search for HOA annexation records at the county recorder's office, not just deed restrictions from the seller. I asked for a complete copy of the CC&RS, the 2019 annexation filing, and the meeting minutes from every board meeting in the past 3 years. Dwight sighed in a way that suggested he was hoping I'd just pay the fine. 3 days after my request, I got the documents. A thick envelope that smelled like toner and bureaucratic indifference. I spread the CC&RS across my kitchen table and started reading with a yellow highlighter. I'm an electrician by trade, not a lawyer. But I've read enough building codes to know how to find the teeth in a document. And I found something in Article 7, Section 4 of the CC&Rs. A clause about pre-existing improvements. It stated that any structure or installation that predated the HOA's recorded jurisdiction over a parcel was considered a grandfathered improvement and was exempt from architectural review requirements and aesthetic compliance fines provided the improvement had been permitted by the applicable county or municipal authority. I had county permits for everything, every single item on that fine. I called Dwight back. I'd like to dispute these fines under Article 7, Section 4. My solar array system and cabin were all built and permitted before the annexation was recorded. There was a pause. When was your cabin built? Dwight asked. Permitted in March 2021 and completed in November 2022. Another pause longer this time. That's after the annexation. And there it was. My grandfathering argument had a fatal flaw. The annexation predated my construction. I had built everything after Pinterest Ridge technically had jurisdiction. I just hadn't known about it. I sat with that for a moment. The fire in the wood stove ticked and popped. Outside, a pair of crows argued in the bare oak trees. Constance hadn't made a mistake. She had timed this perfectly, waiting until I was fully invested, fully built, fully moved in before dropping the hammer. Because if she'd caught me earlier, I might have walked away. Now I had 3 years of labor in a cabin I'd built, in memory of a life I was rebuilding. I wasn't walking away. But I also wasn't going to win this by arguing grandfathering clauses that I couldn't make stick. I needed a different angle. And I had a feeling the answer was buried somewhere in that 2019 annexation vote that somehow produced 75 votes from 74 homes.